can I ask, I don't know if you saw the Nicola Sturgeon interview, but she had a very direct challenge for the Conservatives. Either accept that the SNP won handsomely the election in Scotland and start to deal with her, or face a sort of steady process which will inevitably lead to the breakup of the Union. What is the Conservatives' plan for Scotland?
Well, we've been crystal clear that we believe very strongly in our union. It's the most enduring and successful union the world has seen. We think Scotland is stronger for being in it, and the union is stronger for having a Scotland part of it. And we did have a referendum on this question in 2014, and at the time, people were told that was a once-in-a-generation referendum. They voted very clearly to remain part of the UK, and I think people can tell that we take respecting the results of referendums very seriously in this government, and we believe that that result should be respected.
Nevertheless, I think 1.2 million people voted for the SNP in this general election, 45% of the total, a very, very high number. Do you not have a Scotland problem? And how do you deal with it?
No, well, I think Nicola Sturgeon herself has acknowledged that not everyone who voted for the SNP necessarily supports independence. I think she said that herself, and as you've just acknowledged as well, a majority of people casting their votes in Scotland in this election did so for parties that support the Union and not separatist parties. So I don't accept that there is necessarily that mandate.
Will you rule out now, therefore, ever allowing Scotland, under this government, to have a second independence referendum?
The Prime Minister has been very clear. He is unequivocally committed to the Union. He passionately believes in it. And I think, as you see this new government get to work, strengthening our union and levelling up and uniting our country will be at the heart of our agenda.
So no referendum under any circumstances?
That is absolutely not our intention.
All right. Let's turn to the other really big issue, of course, of the election campaign, which is Brexit. Can you explain to us what's going to happen with the legislation and the programme for the next few weeks at least?
I can. Well, one overriding mandate that we have from this election is to get Brexit done, and the British people spoke decisively about that. That was the heart of our campaign, to end the gridlock that we've found ourselves in for the past 3 years. We're delighted that we now, with the majority we have, can make progress on that, and we will leave the European Union in a matter of weeks, by the end of January. Our intention is to bring the Withdrawal Bill, the legislation, back to Parliament before Christmas.
This week?
Ideally before Christmas, as soon as possible would be perfect, but obviously those conversations are happening between the relevant parties and the House authorities as we speak. But very clearly we want to bring the legislation back as soon as possible and ensure that we do leave the European Union, as we said we would do, by the end of January.
Now, you're in the Treasury. The other big thing that's going to happen before too long, inevitably, is a budget. What's the timing for that?
Well, what we've said is that our focus immediately is getting Brexit delivered, and that will be our primary focus over the next few weeks. I think reasonably soon after we leave the European Union, at the end of January, you could expect us to bring forward a budget. And that's reasonably soon, and obviously Chancellor will make the announcement as is customary. But I think this is the thing. We want to get Brexit done so we can then focus on everything else. We'll have a Queen's speech this week. At the heart of that will be underlying our commitment to the NHS, £34 billion, more nurses, more GP appointments, better hospitals, and then, as I said, levelling up across the United Kingdom, making sure that opportunity is spread throughout. Those are all the things that we want to get cracking on.
There's a very strange suggestion in several of the papers, clearly briefed out, that you're actually going to put a law into practice which says that you are committed, bind yourself to that £34 billion. What is the point of a government recently elected passing a law to commit itself to doing what it's promised to do in the first place?
Well, I think the NHS was clearly a key part of the narrative during this election campaign, and we've spoken about it, many people have been speaking about it, and we just want to absolutely underscore our commitment to that funding settlement. It is a historic funding settlement.
So you're really saying we really mean it this time?
Well, not just this time. We've already been increasing NHS funding at a record level, but this means that £34 billion extra will go into the NHS. But I would say this, it's not just about the money, and that's what you'll see as we develop these plans. It's about making sure it reaches the front line and makes a difference to people's day-to-day experience. That's why we want more nurses, more GP appointments, new, better hospitals, more diagnostic equipment so that we can detect cancer earlier. Those are the practical things that people want to see on the front line, so it's how we use that money to deliver those changes that will be vital.
And in terms of your other promises, if you don't put legislation in, are we not supposed to trust them?
No, I think the NHS, everyone agrees, is the number one priority of the British people. It's our number one domestic priority, and I think this piece of legislation will just underscore that commitment.
Perhaps the biggest, most obvious gap in your election manifesto was on social care. Boris Johnson had said there was a plan, it didn't appear. When are we going to see the social care plan?
Well, actually, we have a 3-point plan that we did outline in the manifesto.
You talk to all the experts, and they say the money that you're putting in, and that kind of plan for a consensus and a debate sometimes isn't really a plan, and the money is sticking plaster. It's big sticking plaster, but it's sticking plaster. It is not really a new national plan for social care.
Well, I think this is a long-term and complex challenge. I think we all accept that, and it's right that therefore we put some proper energy into solving it. So what we've said is in the short term, we will commit an extra £1 billion a year to make sure that we can stabilise the immediate pressures in the system. I used to be the local government minister with responsibility for councils who are dealing with that, so I think that will help enormously. The second thing is we want to find, and we will work urgently to do this, a cross-party consensus on social care, because it is a long-term challenge and we'd like to build a consensus around it like we have with the NHS that is lasting. And thirdly, a fundamental principle of those reforms and eventual settlement will be that no one needs to sell their home to pay for their care, and that's something that we believe very firmly in.
Doesn't sound like you've got a big visionary plan coming anytime soon.
No, the work has already been in train, but it's important because this is such a long-term challenge and it has eluded governments of all shades to solve it in the past. Whatever solution we come up with needs to be lasting, and therefore it does require a cross-party consensus in order that people know that this is a sustainable solution. So I think it's right that we work together, and we've been committing to doing just that.
Let me ask you about another big part of the government's programme clearly going forward, which is big changes to the institutions of Britain. There's been suggestions in the papers that you're going to look again at the way Whitehall is run, and permanent secretaries being there and lifelong civil servants. There's a feeling that that isn't working for modern Britain, and you're going to reassess that. Is that true?
Well, I think what people watching will not be interested in the process of government. What they want to know is that government is. Well, I think that what they want to know is that government's going to deliver for them. Are our scores improving? Are we investing in transport infrastructure? Is the NHS getting better?
The future of the civil service is of some interest.
Yeah, no, but I think what we're keen about is making sure we deliver on the priorities. Can we now implement a new immigration system, an Australian point-style system? Can we make sure our streets are safer? We recruit more police officers. How we do that, how the Prime Minister organises government to deliver those things, is something, of course, he's thinking about. But ultimately, what matters, are we going to deliver the results that improve people's lives?
Do you want to reform the permanent civil service of this country?
I think we want to make sure that government works effectively to deliver for the British people.
Is that a yes or a no?
No, well, I think we're constantly, whether it's business, I come from a business background, whether it's government, we want to be making sure that we innovate to make sure that we deliver properly. And that we now obviously have a mandate to govern, and we want to make sure that results in improvements to people's lives.
What about the Supreme Court? Are you happy as a government with the way the Supreme Court operates and is chosen?
Yeah, as I think the manifesto said, we will look at the relationship between the courts and Parliament.
That's what I'm asking.
Yes, and I think the Security Minister was on your show, and you asked him the same question, and I'll reiterate what he said, is that we believe fully in the independence of the courts, but of course we should look at all our institutions on a regular basis to make sure they're functioning effectively.
Well, let's come to an institution slightly closer to home. Do you think that the non-payment of the BBC licence fee should now be decriminalised?
Well, that is something that the Prime Minister has said we will look at, and he's instructed people to look at that. I think people...
What's your own view about that?
People do find it would be wrong for me to comment, but in advance of a review that's about to happen. But I think it's fair to say that people find the criminalisation of non-payment of the licence fee to be slightly something that has provoked questions in the past, so we will look at that again. More broadly, funding for the BBC is set out now for, I think, until 2027. But we do live you've obviously had someone on from the media industry as well. The media industry is changing, how people consume media is changing, and it's of course right that we continue to look at those things over time.
So it could well change by 2027. You could decriminalise the licence fee, because that costs about £200 million a year. And that means closing channels, getting rid of drama series and so forth. It's something that people would notice. Is that something the government feels strongly enough to do?
I think that the government feels strongly, as do I, that the BBC is an incredibly important national institution. It plays a very valuable role in our country, in our life, and it will always do that. I think things like criminalisation of the fee is something discrete and specific that we can and should look at, and we will do that in the first instance.
OK, you said in 2027 there's going to be a much bigger look at the BBC. Do you think at that point the licence fee itself, which has been heavily criticised by many people in your party, should go?
No, I wasn't saying that. What I was saying is that the BBC's funding settlement as it relates today is already set out and secure through to 2027. I'm not going to sit here and speculate about things that are, at this point, 8 years down the track. But the point is, at the moment, the main thing to focus on is just the decriminalisation of the licence fee, and everything else with the BBC is secure until 2027.